Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to the podcast. And today I'm going to give my review of AEW's Forbidden Door. So starting off the evening, we're going to kick it off with the pre-show. Our first match on the pre-show is Serpentico versus Kyle Fletcher. I thought it was a decent match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Serpentico and Kyle Fletcher, with Fletcher keeping the pace of the match. Serpentico then hits a Hurricane Rana on Fletcher in the middle of the ring. Fletcher then gets up, hits a Tombstone Piledriver on Serpentico. And then Fletcher ultimately hits the finish, pins for the 3, and your winner of the match is Kyle Fletcher. Hats off to Kyle Fletcher for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the pre-show. It is the House of Black versus Private Party versus Gabe Kidd and Roderick Strong versus Kyle O'Reilly and Tomohiro Ishii. I thought it was a good match, man. It was a back-and-forth matchup with all teams involved, with Ishii and Brody both exchanging in the middle of the ring. O'Reilly and Ishii then were keeping the pace of the match. Ishii then lands a devastating brainbuster in the middle of the ring, but Brody King ultimately hits the finish, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the House of Black. Hats off to the House of Black for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the pre-show. It is Chris Statlander teaming up with Momo Watanabe versus Willow Nightingale and Tam Nakano. Number one, Chris Statlander's new entrance was absolutely awesome. The match itself, it was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between both teams, with Nightingale and Nakano keeping the pace of the match. Nakano and Watanabe were exchanging in the middle of the ring. Willow and Chris then both exchanged in the middle of the ring as well. Willow then hits a devastating Avalanche Death Valley driver for a near fall, but Nakano ultimately hits the finish, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Willow Nightingale and Tam Nakano. Hats off to Willow Nightingale and Tam Nakano for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a Owen Hart tournament quarterfinal matchup in the pre-show. It is Mariah May versus Saraya. I thought it was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between May and Saraya, with May keeping the pace of the match. May and Saraya then both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Mariah May hitting a hip attack on Saraya in the corner. Toni Storm then attacks Harley Cameron ringside, which allows May to hit a roll-up on Saraya, pins her for the 3, and your winner of the match and moving on in the Owen Hart Cup tournament is Mariah May. Hats off to Mariah May for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the buy-in. It is pretty much the main event of the buy-in. It is Takashi and Yota Tsujui and Titan versus Lucha Bros and Mystico. I thought it was a great match, man. It was a great showcase for both these teams, back-and-forth matchup. Lucha Bros and Mystico were keeping the pace of the match, with Mystico ultimately applying a submission hold. And your winners of the match due to a tap-out is Lucha Bros and Mystico. Hats off to the Lucha Bros and Mystico for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our first match of the main card. It is MJF versus Hechicero. I thought it was a good match, man. It was a back-and-forth matchup between MJF and Hechicero, with MJF keeping the pace of the match. MJF then hits a pile driver on Hechicero in the middle of the ring. Hechicero then applies a submission hold. MJF gets out of that. He applies the Salt of the Earth on Hechicero, but the hold is broken. MJF then hits a Long Island Sunrise off the top rope on Hechicero, and then MJF ultimately hits a Brainbuster on Hechicero, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match is MJF. Hats off to MJF for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a 6-man tag team matchup. It is the Acclaimed and Tanahashi versus the Elite. I thought it was a good match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between both teams, with the Acclaimed and Tanahashi keeping the pace of the match. Tanahashi then applies the Texas Cloverleaf in the middle of the ring, but the hold is broken. Max Caster hits a mic drop off the top rope, but Okada hits a devastating Rainmaker in the middle of the ring, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are the Elite. Hats off to the Elite for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. Is another Owen Hart Cup tournament quarterfinal matchup. It is Shingo Takagi versus Bryan Danielson. I thought this was a great match. Back and forth matchup between Takagi and Danielson, with Takagi keeping the pace of the match. Takagi then hits a devastating DDT on Danielson off the apron. Looked like Danielson got a neck injury from that, or a stinger, if you will. Danielson and Takagi then both exchanged in the middle of the ring, with Danielson landing multiple yes kicks on Takagi. Takagi gets up, hits a power slam on Danielson, and then Takagi hits a Made in Japan on Danielson for a near fall. Danielson then gets up, hits a running knee on Takagi for a near fall, but Danielson applies a submission hold. The referee sounds for the bell, and your winner of the match is Bryan Danielson. Hats off to Bryan Danielson for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. Is for the AEW Women's title. It is Shirakawa versus Toni Storm. I thought it was a good match, man. It was a great showcase by Shirakawa. Shirakawa was keeping the pace of the match. She also ends up applying a figure 4 leg lock on Toni Storm in the middle of the ring, but the hold is broken. Storm and Shirakawa then both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Storm hitting a hip attack on Shirakawa into the corner. And then Storm ultimately hits a Storm Zero on Shirakawa, pins her for the 3, and your winner of the match, and still AEW Women's Champion, is Toni Storm. Hats off to Toni Storm for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is Zack Sabre Jr. versus Orange Cassidy. Again, I thought this was a good match. Back and forth matchup between Sabre Jr. and Cassidy, with Cassidy keeping the pace of the match. Cassidy hits a beach break on Zack Sabre Jr. in the middle of the ring, as well as an orange punch. But Zack Sabre Jr. applies a submission hold on Orange Cassidy, and your winner of the match due to submission is Zack Sabre Jr. Hats off to Zack Sabre Jr. for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a 6-man tag team matchup. It is Hook teaming up with Shibata and Samoa Joe versus Jericho, Jeff Cobb, and Big Bill. I thought it was a decent match. It was a back-and-forth matchup between both teams, with Hook, Shibata, and Joe keeping the pace of the match. Jericho then applies a wall to Jericho in the middle of the ring, but the hold is broken. Jericho then hits a code breaker in the middle of the ring, but Hook ultimately hits a Judas effect in the middle of the ring, pins for the 3, and your winners of the match are Hook, Shibata, and Samoa Joe. Hats off to Hook, Shibata, and Samoa Joe for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It's for the TNT Championship. It's a ladder match. It is Mark Briscoe versus Takeshita versus Dante Martin versus El Phantasmo versus Lio Rush versus the Scapegoat Jack Perry. I thought this was a great match, man. There was a lot of great spots in this matchup. Back and forth matchup. Mark Briscoe ends up hitting a senton over the ropes to the outside through a table. It looked absolutely brutal. Takeshita then hits a Blue Thunder Bomb off the apron through a table to the outside. And then Jack ends up walking up the ladder, grabs the championship, and your winner of the match and new TNT champion is Jack Perry. Hats off to Jack Perry for getting the win in this matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is a title versus title matchup. It is Mercedes Moné defending the TBS Championship against Stephanie Vaquer for the New Japan Strong Women's Championship. I thought it was a good match, man. It was a great showcase by Vaquer. Back and forth matchup with Stephanie Vaquer keeping the pace of the match. Moné then hits a moneymaker on Stephanie, and then Moné applies a crossface on Stephanie, and your winner of the match by submission is Mercedes Moné, and now she is the New Japan Strong Women's Champion. Hats off to Mercedes Moné for getting the win in that matchup. But after the match, Mercedes Moné is standing in the ring holding both championships, and then all of a sudden Britt Baker's music hits. Britt comes down to the ramp. She pretty much stares down Mercedes Moné, so it looks like we're going to get a Britt Baker versus Mercedes Moné match, which I am absolutely all for that. After that, AEW played a video package, and it looks like AEW's Dynasty will take place in the Tokyo Dome in January. So again, this was something that I was talking about now with the Forbidden Door for the past couple weeks leading up to the pay-per-view last night, that I was hoping AEW would do an event in Japan, and we're finally getting that with AEW Dynasty in January live from the Tokyo Dome. So it's going to be a crazy night. Definitely looking forward to Dynasty in January. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. Is for the IWGP World Championship. It is Naito versus Jon Moxley. I thought this was a good match, man. It was a back-and-forth matchup between Naito and Jon Moxley. Naito and Moxley both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Moxley keeping the pace of the match. Moxley hits a paradigm shift on Naito. Naito gets up, hits an enziguri on Moxley. Moxley then hits a Death Rider on Naito for a near fall, but Naito ultimately hits the finish on Moxley, pins him for the 3, and your winner of the match and new IWGP World Heavyweight Champion is Naito. Hats off to Naito for getting the win in that matchup. Moving on from that, we go into our next match of the night. It is the main event of the Forbidden Door. It is for the AEW title. It is Will Ospreay versus Swerve. This match was great, man. The beginning of before the match even took place, the entrance for both Ospreay and Swerve were awesome. Ospreay pays homage to the late great Hayabusa. He comes out with the Hayabusa mask. Same kind of entrance that Hayabusa used to do with the Phoenix and stuff like that. It was a great video package. And it was great to see Will Ospreay pay homage to Hayabusa. He was one of my favorites growing up watching professional wrestling. And for Swerve, Swerve has Jim Jones from Dipset. He comes out. He kind of presents, if you will, Swerve. I thought that was awesome, too, especially them being live from New York. It was a great deal for Swerve as well. So, again, both entrances were awesome. The match itself, man, it was a fantastic match. It was a great match between Ospreay and Swerve, back and forth matchup. Ospreay and Swerve both exchange in the middle of the ring, with Ospreay keeping the pace of the match. Ospreay then hits a Hurricane Rana off the barricade on Swerve. Ospreay then hits a Styles Clash for a near fall. Swerve then gets up, hits an angle slam off the top rope on Ospreay. Swerve then hits a Swerve Stomp off the top rope to the outside on the announce table. Swerve then hits a pile driver off the barricade on Ospreay. Ospreay gets up, hits an Avalanche Ox Cutter on Swerve. Ospreay then hits a Stormbreaker for a near fall on Swerve. And then Swerve hits a Hidden Blade of his own. Ospreay took out the referee. Ospreay then hits a Hidden Blade. Don Callis is here. Don tries to hand Ospreay a screwdriver, but Ospreay says no. Prince Nana then attacks Don Callis. Swerve then hits a Swerve Stomp for a near fall. Swerve hits a House Call for a near fall as well. Swerve then hits another House Call, and then Swerve ultimately hits the finish on Ospreay. Pins for the 3, and your winner of the match, and still AEW World Champion, is Swerve Strickland. Hats off to Swerve for getting the win in this matchup and retaining the AEW World Championship. A couple of things I want to talk about with Forbidden Door, man, before I get out of here. Number one, was it the best AEW pay-per-view of all time? No, it was not. With that being said, though, was it really good? Yes, it was. I think for the first time, I can honestly say, from top to bottom, I'm talking about from the buy-in, pre-show to the end of the pay-per-view, the main card. It was good. It was really good. I mean, this was probably the first time I can honestly say that I watched a buy-in, and I actually enjoyed it. And honestly, a lot of the matches on the buy-in were almost better than some of the matches on the main card, to be honest with you. The six-man tag team matchup with Lucha Bros teaming up with Mystico was a fantastic match. Willow Nightingale and Chris Statlander having that tag team matchup was great as well. Obviously, there's some unfinished business there between Willow and Chris Statlander. The entrance and new theme for Chris Statlander was absolutely awesome. I'm loving the work that Statlander's been doing, obviously being a heel, working with Stokely Hathaway. So, I mean, it's a great combination for Statlander and Stokely, so I'm all for that as well. It was a solid night last night. I mean, obviously everybody's talking about Britt Baker returning last night after, her being out for a while. It's a great, to see her back. It's a great addition back to the roster again, and to be honest with you, it's something that's, again, this is something I mentioned about MJF when he returned. This was something that AEW desperately needed. And Britt Baker was sorely missed. Obviously, everybody's still, missing Jamie Hayter and stuff like that, and hopefully we get to see Jamie Hayter here relatively soon, now that we see Britt Baker back. But I'm all for it, man. If we're going to get a match between Baker and Monet, possibly at, All In, I'm all for it. Hopefully Britt Baker has a couple matches and leads up to a match with Mercedes at All In, because the match sells itself. Britt Baker, she's one of the originals, OGs, if you will, of AEW. And Mercedes Moné, with what she's done in her career up to this point, it'd be a great, match, man. It'd be a great match to see between Britt Baker and Mercedes Moné. Maybe we might see that at AEW's All In this year, which I'll be absolutely all for. The main event, Ospreay and Swerve, man. I mentioned this multiple times about Ospreay, and I'm going to talk about Swerve here too. But Ospreay, the entire set last night for Ospreay. And what I mean by that is the video package of, showing Ospreay's highlights as well as Hayabusa. There's a lot of resemblance there between Hayabusa and Will Ospreay. Hayabusa was well before his time. If you guys don't know who Hayabusa is, and some of you probably do not. Ospreay. Hayabusa really made a name for himself in his career, working in Japan, obviously, and made a humongous name for himself working under a company known as FMW, which was at the time Onita's company. And they put on fantastic matches. I mean, matches that were legendary, matches that you'll never see again, from obviously the barbed wire death matches to, exploding ring matches to all kinds of crazy matches and, exploding cage matches. I mean, Hayabusa was a part of all this and really made a name for himself working over in Japan. Obviously had matches in ECW as well. Hayabusa was a household name. And then you watch the video package, and the moveset that Hayabusa had. Like I said, he was well before his time. The Phoenix Splash, the Acai moonsault to the outside. He was doing all this over in Japan, working under FMW. So, and see Ospreay kind of do the same thing: the shooting stars, the 450s, the springboards. It's a lot of resemblance between Ospreay and Hayabusa. And to see Ospreay come out to the ring after the video package was played, wearing the Hayabusa mask and doing the Hayabusa pose and stuff like that. It was as a fan of Hayabusa, it was great to see. I thought it was one of those things that was really awesome. And Swerve, Swerve's entrance was awesome. Obviously having Jim Jones a part of that entrance, a part of being, obviously him being a part of Dipset and stuff like that. And see him, live in New York, and obviously they made a humongous name for themselves in New York. And Swerve is obviously a part of the music scene as well, so it was great to see that. But the match itself, man, was fantastic. You got two guys that are on, the top of their game right now, with Swerve and Ospreay. And Ospreay is probably one of the, if not the best wrestler in the world right now. And that's not, discrediting Swerve. Just Swerve has done a fantastic job. Not only, his career so far in AEW, but what he's done as world champion has been fantastic. He is carrying that company on his back. And he's a workhorse, man. Swerve, he's put the time in, he's put the effort in, and Swerve continuously keeps putting on, banger matches, as well as Will Ospreay. But my standpoint was the same with this main event, man. It was, how was this, really going to go? Who can really afford to take the L? Would it be a Swerve or Ospreay? There was obviously a lot of speculation that Ospreay might take some time off, and that's still yet to be seen. I know that he's going to have a match with Daniel Garcia defending the international title, which will be a great match. But I am looking forward to who's going to challenge Swerve next. I think Swerve and his title run's been great. I'm happy that, Tony Khan and AEW didn't just hot potato the belt and only have Swerve defend it one or two times. I'm glad that he's actually having a really good title run. And if anything, after last night, it definitely solidified Swerve as a world champion. And the fact that he's going to be holding that belt for a while, and he's doing a fantastic job with it, hands down. The other things I want to talk about too that doesn't 100% pertain to Forbidden Door is Adam Page. There was a video package being played from Collision this past weekend, and everybody was wondering what was going on with Adam Page. And the rumors were that the AEW writing team, and I put that in quotations, were trying to write him back into a storyline, and it looks like they put him in a video package, and it looks like Adam Page is going to return here relatively soon. My thing is, obviously, Blood and Guts is right around the corner. It's in a few weeks. Does he factor into that storyline with the Elite and Team AEW? That's still yet to be seen. But again, it's a great addition back to AEW, and having Adam Page come back to AEW after being off for a while with AEW. So it's great to see him back. But all in all, man, I can honestly say Forbidden Door was solid last night. The other big news, obviously, coming out of Forbidden Door last night was the announcement of Dynasty. Dynasty is going to be live from the Tokyo Dome in January. So, from what I understand, it looks like they're going to be going over to Tokyo, obviously, which this is something where, I mentioned this multiple times, even when it pertains to the Forbidden Door. I believe I mentioned this, earlier in the week, last week, that when I did my Dynamite review to you guys, and I told you guys that this was something that the concept of the Forbidden Door has kind of lost its mantra, if you will. It's its importance. But this was also something that I mentioned in the past too, where AEW's done a lot of business now with New Japan. This was the third Forbidden Door, so 3 years of the Forbidden Door. It was kind of time for AEW to go over to Japan and work with New Japan Pro Wrestling over in Japan, and we're finally going to get that with AEW working with Japan in Dynasty. But playing that video package last night, it looks like it's also going to be another Forbidden Door kind of concept or format, if you will, because they were also showing, the logos of not only AEW but New Japan, but as well as Stardom and CMML. So it looks like this working relationship between all these companies are going to be lasting for quite a while. The other thing about last night, too, was, obviously some of the matches, but some of the wrestlers that actually stuck out for me. Number one was Stephanie Vacure. And I might be pronouncing her name wrong, and I apologize, but she did a fantastic job against Mercedes Moné, and I'm hoping we get to see, Stephanie more in AEW. I think she did a fantastic job against Mercedes Moné to a point where a lot of the fans were actually rooting more for Stephanie than Mercedes Moné, myself included. I think she did a fantastic job, and hopefully we get to see her back in AEW. The other person that stuck out to me was Shirakawa. Shirakawa did a fantastic job against Toni Storm, and to me was one of the toughest tests for Toni Storm since she's had that belt. Shirakawa could be a household name, whether, obviously she's working with Stardom, but as well as AEW. And the impact that she's already made with AEW, obviously the relationship that she has, the friendship she has with Mariah May, and the match they had with Toni Storm last night, Shirakawa would be a great addition to AEW, hands down. She does a fantastic job in the ring, as well as Stephanie Vacure, man. I mean, if AEW can add both these women to the roster for AEW, it's not going to hurt the roster at all. They did a fantastic job last night, and those two names really stuck out for me as far as talent that's not signed to AEW that really stuck out to me. They did a fantastic job, and hopefully we get to see them again in AEW. Hopefully soon. But again, man, this was something where, I mentioned multiple times now, past few weeks, that AEW needs a shot in the arm. And do I think Britt Baker was that shot in the arm? No, I don't. But is it great to see her back in AEW? Yeah. Because everybody wants to see Britt Baker versus Mercedes Moné. It's going to be a great match. The match sells itself. And we're probably going to get that match probably at All In. But it was great to see Britt come back and kind of, have a moment there, if you will, with Mercedes Moné, kind of giving her a heads up like, hey, I'm back, and I'm coming after you, and I'm coming after that TBS title, which I'm all for that. All for it. But we're going to see what happens, man. I think, like I said, I think AEW needs a shot in the arm, and I don't know necessarily what that's going to be. Obviously, the TV deal, rights deal is coming up here soon, and we're going to figure out what's going to go on with that. Are they going to have a deal with HBO Max, which I desperately think they need? Obviously, like I mentioned earlier, the announcement of Dynasty going over to the Tokyo Dome in Tokyo, Japan. I'm all for it. And this is just the, kind of giving back to New Japan and the fans over in New Japan, having AEW talent and CMML talent and possible Stardom talent over there to put on an event like Dynasty. So I'm all for it. And it opens up more doors for AEW as well, because right now the only, outside the U.S., the only place that they go to have, a pay-per-view in their event is All In, which is at Wembley. So to have an event in Japan at the Tokyo Dome, where Tokyo Dome is synonymous with New Japan Pro Wrestling. They usually have their Wrestle Kingdom events there. It's a humongous arena, so it'd be great to see AEW working with New Japan Pro Wrestling over in Tokyo. And it's great for all companies involved, to be honest with you. So I'm all for it. But like I said, man, it was a good show. This was a good pay-per-view. And Tony Khan, again, man, he continuously starting to become more and more solidified as Mr. Pay-per-view. That's what Tony Khan does. He does a great job by doing that. Hopefully we get more of that on the episodic television that we're getting on Dynamite and Collision. And we're going to start seeing a lot more people return from injury. We just got Britt Baker back. We just recently also got Adam Page. He's coming back as well. We're still waiting for Adam Cole and Jamie Hayter and stuff like that. And Tony Khan's also mentioned that he's going to be aggressive in free agency this year. And there are some free agents out there. We don't know what Becky Lynch is doing. Ricochet is another big name, and Dijak. Ricochet, from even watching the pay-per-view last night, he's now on the WWE alumni page, so it looks like Ricochet is leaving the company. Whether that's going to AEW or TNA, that's still yet to be seen, but I'm pretty sure Tony Khan is going to be doing whatever he can to sign Ricochet, and Ricochet would fit perfectly with AEW. I truly believe that. I know Will Ospreay is, really trying to get Ricochet to come over to AEW, and I think Ricochet would fit perfectly over in AEW. But AEW and Tony Khan, they're going to be aggressive with free agency. So we're going to see what happens in the next few weeks, next few months when it pertains to the free agents, which I'm all for it. If it's going to benefit AEW and make the shows better, I'm all for it. But again, Forbidden Door wasn't a bad pay-per-view last night. I'm definitely looking forward to Dynamite this week. This week's Dynamite will be AEW Dynamite's Beach Break, and the card already looks pretty good. I'm sure we're going to hear from Britt Baker, which hopefully we do. I know it's going to be Pac versus Bryan Danielson in the Owen Hart Cup tournament, as well as Chris Statlander and Willow Nightingale. They're going to have a rematch or a match, if you will, this week for the Owen Hart Cup tournament as well. So it's going to be a good Dynamite this week. Definitely looking forward to Dynamite Beach Break on Wednesday. I think it's going to be a really good show. So I'm all for it, man. Definitely excited for Dynamite this week and the build towards the next pay-per-view. But with that being said, this is my review of AEW's Forbidden Door. I hope you guys are out there staying safe. Be careful, and remember, stay classy.